I, 39F, have been married to my husband for 12 years with 2 kids. I met my husband, Dan, 41M, in my mid-20s. He was living with his younger brother, Bran, 35M, when I first met him. This goes back to the time when I initially started going out with Dan. That was like 15 to 16 years ago. Bran was still in college, living with my husband. As we started going out, Dan eventually asked me to move in with them. They had rented a 2-bedroom spacious condo. Dan was paying for his brother and managing his own expenses. Moving in with him meant he would get help with the rent. I was sharing an apartment with my colleague back then. It was far from Dan's place. It wasn't cheap either. Commuting was a problem for us. I was in love, and after knowing him for 6 months, moving in with Dan made sense to me. It was a smooth stay until I started missing my stuff and money from my wallet and my closet. It started with money. I didn't notice it for a long time. It was a few cents which went missing from time to time. I'll tell you, I'm an extremely forgetful person. It is to such an extent that I write down all my passwords in a diary. I forget to respond to people for many days and wonder if I've something to do but just can't place my finger on what. Anyways, it was a few cents initially and then a few dollars. It wasn't happening every day, so I wasn't keeping a tab on my accounting. I thought I was not being calculative about my money. During the same time, I found my stuff missing from my closet. Earlier it was just small makeup items. I didn't bother. I thought I was misplacing it at work. Eventually, I realized all the missing items were either unused or slightly used. I told Dan about it and he thought I had forgotten it at my office or someone was stealing it from my bag at the office or at parties. Clearly, there was no reason to hunch that it was being stolen from the house. The house had 2 males and no one came home. My friends occasionally showed up, but doubting them didn't make any sense. I made up a theory that someone was stealing at my workplace. Soon I got careful about my stuff. Once I bought a new perfume bottle and kept it inside the closet mindfully. 2 days later it was missing. That was it. I knew it had to be home. My stuff was getting misplaced from home, and who else than Bran could do it? I wanted to tell Dan about it, but the matter was so petty that I didn't want to confront it without evidence. So I placed a camera in my room facing the closet. That's where all the stuff went missing. I told Dan I needed to find out. I knew it was his brother stealing the stuff, but I told Dan that I felt my friend was doing so and I wanted to catch her red-handed. Dan didn't like the idea of placing a camera in our private space, but the camera angle didn't cover our bed, so he was good. I think he was also done with my constant nagging over losing my money and belongings, so he was like, let's get over it. I bought the camera, installed it, and then invited my friends over on a weekend. While Dan was keeping an eye on my friend, I knew who the culprit was. My friends got smashed and crashed at my place. Eventually, I and Dan also crashed on the living room couch. There was no place in the house. Dan's friends had also come over and 3 of them occupied our bedroom. I know it sounds crazy, but we were in our mid-20s and this is how we used to party back then. Not sure about the Gen's generation, but house parties for us meant 10 plus people getting smashed and crashing up on a friend's couch. The next morning when we reviewed the recordings, we found several of our items were getting stolen, and it was indeed my current Bill, Bran, pulling this off. He took that opportunity to be a jackpot because there were so many people around to put the blame on. My new dress, an expensive clutch, some unused perfume bottles, and a few dollars were on the list of missing items. I was glad to put on a camera and Dan saw the truth about his brother. Dan called and confronted him. Instead of being apologetic, that dude called me BTCH for recording him. I wanted to slap him and knock out his eyeballs, but I stood calm seeing what Dan would do. It was almost 1 year of our relationship and we both were pretty serious about each other. I wanted to test Dan on how he handled such a sensitive issue. Dan slapped him hard for abusing me and asked him to apologize. Bran was such an entitled monster that instead of being sorry, he blamed me for invading their privacy and intruding on their life. Both these brothers shared a good bond and Bran felt I had come in between them. He did all these to chase me off. He said he deliberately did that and wasn't afraid to be caught. He was so sure that Dan would choose his side over me and that's how he'll show my place. Dan threw him out of his house after that. I opted to move out. I mean, Bran was his brother and I was merely a GF of a few months. We've known each other for barely a year. Dan said it wasn't about how long, it was just about right and wrong, and Bran was clearly the one who wronged me. That was it. It strengthened our bond and inculcated trust in our relationship. Dan's parents tried to convince him to take in his brother, but he was adamant about not letting him in again. Fast forward to this day, Bran has lost his job in the pandemic and cannot manage his basic expenses. He wants us to take him in. We live in a 3-bedroom house with 2 kids. There is 1 extra room because the kids share 1 room. It's just a matter of a couple of years when both would need a separate room. Bill has a wife and a 5-year-old son. He is insisting that we let him in our extra room and his son in our kids' room. The kids' room is not spacious for 3. I also don't want his kids to be with mine. He is one of the most spoilt and pampered kids. He has never visited my house, thank God, but I have seen him bringing down my in-laws' house. Bill and his wife don't even school him. Forget about schooling, they don't even try to stop him. I don't want such a kid at my house. When Bill first approached my husband, he turned him down. Then Bill brought Mill to convince my husband. Bill is using his sob story to gain sympathy and get an entry into our house. He was in retail. With the pandemic hitting, retail suffered and he lost his job. He survived on his savings for a year. When the conditions subsided, he interviewed for other jobs, but then the next wave popped up and the retail industry got completely shut again. Now he wants us to take him in. Initially, my husband had turned down the request, but with my Mill's entry into the dynamics, I feel my husband is going to change his mind. It's just not about the past. Even after 12 years of my marriage to this family, I'm still not on good terms with Bill and his family. I won't comment about Bill's wife because we have had very limited interaction, but Bill has been an evil with me in the past and his son is also one pampered kid. I really don't know how to dodge this situation. Update 1. Answering some of the common questions from the last post. Where was the Bill all these while after he was evicted by my husband from the apartment? After leaving my husband's apartment, he moved to his college dorm. He was in limited contact with my husband and not at all connected with me until my husband announced his decision to marry me. Bill was the first one to raise his eyebrows. He even badmouthed about me to my in-laws. He told them I was controlling and dominating. He continued doing so even after the wedding. He was invited to the wedding because the event was organized in a way that all my sisters and friends would be bridesmaids and all of my husband's brothers and friends would be groomsmen. In that setup, it was almost impossible to cut off Bran from the wedding. So, I kind of agreed to let him into our wedding. He maintained distance from me and so did I. That was it. Did he invite us to his wedding? No, he did the courthouse wedding, and no one from the family was invited except for my parents-in-law. It was a small and swift wedding, at least that was the reason given to all of us for no invitation. But as per the gossip mongers of the family, the actual reason was that Bill married on a tight budget. He doesn't make enough and his wife doesn't work. She still doesn't work and all the responsibility falls on Bill. The update is, after my Mill got involved, things got complicated. She has been pestering my husband to let Bill live with us. My husband tried to ignore it a few times, but ultimately he fell prey to the emotional trap of helping the younger brother and standing up for family pleas. Husband came to me and said that in-laws were pestering him to the point that it was becoming difficult for him to turn them down. He asked if there's any possibility I would agree to let Bran into our house. He was scared of the past. I asked him, do we know how long he's going to stay with us, because honestly, no one knows when this pandemic thing is going to end and if he's going to pay for the groceries and other bills. We can ignore the house rent, it won't increase with their addition. But other bills would. I asked my husband if we have enough to feed an extra 3 people. He said no. I made him understand we cannot let Bill's son starve while feeding our own children just because his father doesn't earn, or how we split the groceries in the same kitchen. I work while Bill's wife doesn't and I cannot keep an eye on her if she is using my stuff in the kitchen. Letting him in was not only about our privacy or our past bitterness but also practicality. We need to straighten out these things before taking any decision. Husband knew that I was not ready for this, but he was also aware that my concerns were genuine. He said next time Bill or Mill would call him, he would discuss all these matters with them and see what they have to offer. I just hope my husband makes a mindful decision and doesn't pile up an extra load on himself. Though we both are working and with God's grace still have the job, we don't know until when. There is so much uncertainty with this new variant of virus popping up every now and then. We need to save for the rainy days. In this situation, we cannot afford to take extra burden on ourselves and especially of those people who never loved and respected us. There's also one more thing that I didn't tell my husband yet, but if such a situation arises, I will bring this up. My parents-in-law live in a spacious 2-bedroom house with an extra room used to store discarded items. They can adjust in one room and let Bill and his wife take another one. The storehouse can be converted into a kid's den. If Mill is so concerned about Bill, she can well offer to let them stay with her. Isn't this a hypocrisy? Update 2. Yeah, so my husband discussed all those concerns with Bill and my dread was also true. Bill doesn't intend to pay us for any of the household bills. He says he cannot afford to. I don't know how he has been managing to feed his family until now. Bill was like, you guys still have a job and both of you earn. Can't you take care of our expenses for a few months? It was so spineless of him to say this. We do earn, but it doesn't mean we are obliged to bear their expenses. It wasn't even a request anymore, more like an entitlement and order. My husband said we are not in a position to bear the expenses of 3 extra people. A day later Mill called up my husband and said we needed to sort this out. Bill is in serious crisis and as a family, we should help him. She suggested that we can agree on a middle ground. She added Bill to the call to sort out the matter. She said that we let them in and they'll take care of themselves. Though Bill tried to object, Mill shut him up and said, first get in the house and then we'll figure it out. Her statement was suspicious and shady. I was listening to the conversation thoroughly. Told my husband that there's no way we can let them in because their intentions don't look good. Husband placed the call on mute to discuss the details with me. Bill thought husband had hung up and he started cussing me. He told Mill that I was the manipulative BTCH who was not letting my husband help him. He was like, I told you mom, she has always been a control freak and she's using Dan as a puppet. She has always done that. She never liked my closeness with Dan. She manipulated Dan to throw me out of the apartment, falsely accusing me of stealing. Husband heard all of it and so did I. There was nothing left to be considered. Husband unmuted the call and said he heard everything and there's no way he's gonna have him here at our place. After my husband hung up the call, Mill called me separately and she was like, "What did you gain by troubling my son? He's already in so much problem and you're adding to it. What would happen if you just let him in your spare room? They are not robbers to get away with your food and stuff." I was baffled. After hearing Bill cursing me, she was still hoping that I would help him. She didn't stop him from using the B word for me. I lost my composure. I said if she was so moved by his son's misery, why doesn't she let him in their house? They also have an extra room and a storehouse. What's the problem in having them? She didn't see that coming. After fumbling for a moment, she said that Phil was an old man and gets headaches with noise. Bill has a 5-year-old boy and Phil would be disturbed by his chaos. The truth came out. She knows how monster of a child Bill's son was and she doesn't want to have him around. What a hypocrisy. She can't bear to have her grandchild around but expects me to tolerate his mischief. I told her all of this and she started fuming. She said I was just assuming things and accusing her of something which is not true. She didn't volunteer just because of Phil. That old man gets anxious with any minor chaos. He is in his 80s and wants a peaceful life. I said everyone is entitled to a peaceful life at least in their own house and she was trying to rip us off that peace. She suggested that maybe it could be an opportunity for Bill's son to learn some manners and discipline from my children. I said what if my children get influenced otherwise? You know, children pick up bad things more easily than good stuff. When she no longer could argue with me, she was like, "Bran was right, you're indeed manipulative and strong-headed. No wonder my son cannot make any decision of his own. You're so dominant." I said maybe he listens to me because I speak logic and not nonsense like you guys. She hung up cursing me. I told my husband the details about the call. He asked me not to think a lot about this. We have made up our minds and we're not going to let them in and ruin our peaceful life. I just wish he stays strong in his decision and doesn't cave into their pressure. Update 3. I got a call from Bill's wife after a week of what happened last. She was very polite and gentle in her greetings. No, it didn't sound pretentious. For some reason, she sounded genuine. Maybe she was genuine. She told me that she knows everything that had been happening around. I kind of got embarrassed that I denied them entry to my house, yet she was so polite but remained stiff. She said, "I understand your concern and I don't want to burden you, but the thing is we really help. They have exhausted all their savings covering the basic needs of house rent and other necessities." She also told me that she has also taken up a job at a restaurant to survive. I didn't ask what kind of job it was. She isn't a chef, so I'm guessing it would be at the counter. Makes me wonder about the pay. She said she has been asking Bill to take up whatever job is available in the market currently, but he says he cannot do odd jobs. He prefers to remain jobless and pile up on others instead of taking any other job. That was ridiculous. I won't deny that I melted to hear her misery. But she told me that she doesn't want such a favor from us because Bill would become more careless if he gets served free without lifting his finger. I sighed in relief. Because after such intense conversation, it would have been difficult for me to turn her down. She said she wanted to borrow some money from me and she would return it in installments. She said that the apartment in which they were living was up for lease at a discounted price due to the pandemic crisis on retail property. She wanted to lease the house to be able to save up the monthly rent. The deal made sense, but she didn't have an aggregated amount. I said I could not commit right away. I needed to discuss this with my husband. She requested that we keep it confined within ourselves. She said Bill was furious at me and would rebuke her for asking for favors from me. She said that though we never got a chance to bond, she felt a warmth from me and thought I would be helpful. I assured her that I would keep it within ourselves and would get back to her after discussing this with my husband. I discussed that with my husband. The first thing Dan asked me was, "Do I believe her?" He said it's risky. It might be possible that Bran was using her to get money from us because now that he has fought with us, there's no way we're gonna help him. He made sense. Could be possible that I was getting tricked into it? So, I just dropped the idea. I was hoping that she would follow up like Bill used to do for the house, but weeks passed, she didn't call or text me. Guilty of admitting, but I almost forgot about this amidst work and kids. One day, I was mindlessly scrolling the social media when I remember about this. I texted her asking if she was able to manage the money for the lease. She replied no. I apologized to her. I was about to text that I forgot about responding to her. But she responded that she understands that she cannot expect any favor from me after what Bill had done to us. That's the reason she didn't follow up. I felt an eerie sensation passing down my spine. I felt so terrible. I called her and apologized. She said it was fine and didn't request for the money. She was still polite and gentle. I asked for her account details to make the transfer. She refused, saying it was fine, but I insisted. She said that they were due to vacate the house in the next few days and she wasn't sure if the owner had leased it out to someone else. I asked her to check ASAP. She was still reluctant, but I assured her that I trust her and was ready to lend. She said okay and hung up. She called me back after some time and said it was still available and at a slightly cheaper rate because the owner was not getting any takers due to the COVID crisis. I was so relieved. I made the transfer and asked her to finalize the deal with the property owner. This time I didn't even discuss this with my husband. I was so sure to help her out. After the paperwork was done, she called me again, thanking and assuring me that she would repay it in installments. I asked her what did she say to Bill. She had told him that she had borrowed the money from her employer and the money would be deducted from her salary every month. She said if she tells my name, Bill would refuse to pay. I asked her what was their plan after vacating the house. She said she was planning to move with her mom to the suburbs. It was quite far off from the city and her workplace, but she had no other options. Also, there was not enough space for 3, but her mom had still agreed to have them. However, Bill was not ready to move in there. He was trying to negotiate with Mill to let them in, but Mill was not agreeing. I wanted to ask how her son is so pampered and doesn't listen to anyone. But before I could ask, she told me that Bill had spoiled the kid to the extent that he didn't even listen to her. He doesn't let her discipline him, and if she ever tries to school him, he bashes her. I wanted to ask her why she even married that bum, why still hasn't divorced him yet. But that was too personal and I didn't want to hurt her. I feel he was the one not letting her work until now, and now that she's earning, it's just a matter of time before she's gonna kick him out. She told me that she would be leasing the house in her name. I feel that's her plan. I'll be glad to know when she gets rid of him.